Hey, everybody, welcome back to Practical Liberty. My name's Henry Bingaman. Uh, Today's guest I met at a private club in South Florida 5 or 6 years ago at this point. Now, this is the kind of private club. It's owned by somebody that's almost a billionaire. The walls in this place are covered in $100,000 paintings. The bar literally only has a top shelf, and like multi-million dollar business deals get done here with just a handshake. I got invited because I happen to have made this person a lot of money with my marketing over the years. So the room's filled with a bunch of founders of 7, 8, 9 figure businesses, some authors, and just an assortment of really interesting people. And we decided at one point to play a poker game. And somehow a poker table like magically appears out of the side and somebody decides to deal. So now a lot of these people at the table were just very interesting, but there's one person that like was head and shoulders more interesting than everyone else. He's telling stories about sailing through a hurricane in the Bahamas. He spent some time living in Cuba, running from government agents. He was mistaken for a CIA agent by some cops in Panama. Just like every story was more and more crazy than the next. But what I really ended up liking about him was that, he's not the type of person that just takes life as it comes. He's really intentionally designed his own life to maximize for freedom, to maximize for travel, and all the things that he really cares about. And I think as a liberty loving audience, that's something we don't think enough about. We let too much of our life just happen to us, and we don't intentionally design it to fulfill our needs. And so I wanted to bring Tain on again. He's been here. He was here last about May of 2023, but we have a lot more updates to share. So, Tain, thanks for coming back on, man.
Thanks, Henry, for that great introduction. Yeah, that poker game was a real rogues gallery and a real who's who of some of the online business and marketing world that you and I are part of. And I always enjoy my time when I'm down there. Boy, you get a chance to learn from some real movers and shakers. But these are also some of the people that I admired. And when I set out to create my lifestyle, which I know we're going to get into here, these are some of the people that I learned from as well. So we're going to share some of the strategies and tactics that really worked for them. A lot of them are quite a bit older than you and me. So thank you again for having me on. I'm looking forward to getting into it.
I mean, it's obviously my pleasure. We've been working a lot closer together. As a lot of people know, I'm making a big push this year towards getting a second residency, getting just a foothold outside the United States, to kind of just secure my freedom. It's something that a concept that you taught me is sovereign risk, where if one government has total authority over you and all your assets, you're at much higher risk than if you diversify kind of the authority structures you're under. So that can be, get some of your finances outside the U.S., get a second residency, so there's always a place that'll let you in if for something, some reason the United States doesn't become a friendly place to live anymore. And so you've done this. You have residencies all over the world. Can you kind of talk about some of the way you've set up your life? Just give people kind of a big picture of your, I guess, living situation.
Yeah, yes. Look, I understood by instinct, by genetic disposition, right? Many years ago. I'm in my 50s now, and I truly understood this probably in my teens and even earlier, that there was gonna be a big reckoning in my lifetime. Now, don't ask me how. It had to be clues that I picked up. I grew up in a military family, so we spent lots and lots of dinner time discussions, trying to solve the world's problems. Maybe that had something to do with my young, impressionable mind sort of glomming onto the idea that obviously empires rise and fall, right? Good things come and good things go. And I was always aware that I was living in a really extra special situation in the United States of America, where you had tremendous freedom. I mean, when we were kids, you would hear people say, hey, butt out, man, it's a free country, right? You don't hear that so much anymore, which is a curious tell by itself. But I remember, even at a very young age, being very conscious that I was super lucky. I was very fortunate to be born into a place where I was living, and also that it wasn't going to continue. Now, again, but by the time I was, at full maturity and in my 20s, obviously the unpleasant events of September 11th, 2001 had unfolded at some point along the way. And what we've seen is that really, quite frankly, events have borne me out in my view of what was coming. And so I started taking steps very early to put myself on a firm footing, should the worst kind of outcomes play out. And we're obviously nowhere near a worst possible outcome, but there's a lot of things on the horizon, some of which we'll touch upon today, that make it kind of imperative that people who care about freedom, like your audience, that you make some kind of moves and some kind of effort. And I'm going to make this very simple for you because, quite frankly, like anything, right? As the old saying goes, the journey of 10,000 miles starts with the first single step. And so I got busy doing this, again, mostly by pure instinct. And I'll tell you how my journey began with a teaching job in Europe here in just a second. But I just put one foot in front of the other, and year after year, I found myself not just able to live with a lot less hassles and headaches that I see people struggling with, but also able to teach this to others. Right? It sort of came upon me that I knew enough about this that I could share it with others.
It's interesting. So you've been working with me. We're doing a little consulting about kind of some of the plans I need to put in place. And you're using this framework that you use with your high net worth clients, the W.E.A.L.T.H framework, which it's kind of interesting. It's just an acronym, but the wealth is really about freedom and autonomy that it comes through, right? That's what true wealth is having the options to do whatever you want. But there's an interesting, one of the things I want to talk about, and I thought of this because is the L in your wealth stands for leave the herd behind, right? You got to leave the herd if you're going to be free in your life. But a lot of people object to like the framing that America's going down or that you should get a spot outside the United States. So I have all these things I've thought of. Like I don't want to be blackpilled because I'm not. I'm very optimistic about the future. But there's like a million different ways that the US could tip into turmoil right now. And I know we were talking about some of these offline. You want to kind of cover like maybe they're all low probability, but when they stack up, all these things seem to get so overwhelming that something's going to happen. Like, what are some of the tipping points you see coming?
I think it's a very good place for us to begin. I think the people are benumbed, aren't they? Right? I think a lot of people are actually a little bit like punch drunk from the events of the 2020s, to the point where any of these things at any other time in history would probably be a much bigger deal than they are. But the fact that there's an entire list of them, which I'm going to run through here, this is just something I know you put your 2 cents in, and we just created sort of off the cuff. Obviously, 2023 had the second, third, and fourth largest banking crisis in the history of the U.S. Okay, more banking failures are coming. Okay, well, how's that going to be fixed? Well, what's likely to happen is a lot of people are going to lose money, and they're going to print more money to cover depositors, right? So that there isn't like a massive French Revolution kind of uprising. So banking crisis, 34 trillion in debt. What does that even mean? A trillion seconds ago is 30,000 years ago. So there's $34 trillion of essentially excess spending that has piled up over the last 20, 40 years. Obviously, stocks are at the highest valuations in history. Most of the gains and most of the stock market is being held up by 7 big tech stocks. How long is that supposed to last? We don't know, right? What history says is things that go that far out of whack will come back into a sort of normal range at some point. Risk of hyperinflation. How much money is the government going to print to keep this whole game going, right? Like exactly where is the upper bound of that? Wealth confiscation. When the government gets bankrupt and desperate and people are restless, right? They tend to steal stuff. And why would that be out of the realm of possibility? Obviously, they can get their hands on a lot of people's 401ks and IRAs, massive tax audits. The IRS is openly admitting they're hiring 87,000 new agents and giving some of them guns and firearms training. Well, why are they doing that? What's that for? The IRS is only to take money from people inside the United States. Escalation of wars, obviously, this is very serious. This is much more serious than people realize. An all-out war with Russia is potentially the end of humanity. And what is NATO doing except poking Russia in the eye over and over again with their stupid policies? China, the Middle East, we're running around like a bully looking for somebody to take us down a peg.
Man, did you see Obama's last quote about the Houthis?
No, I did not.
He said, "Is the bombing working? No. Are we going to keep doing it? Yes."
Yeah,
You're like,
exactly.
oh, dude, that's American policy in like one
That's
sentence.
that's very interesting. You said Obama, but of course Biden
Oh,
said that. But
Biden,
it's the
Jesus.
same, right? Isn't it? Political prosecutions or persecutions, if you will. Obviously, whatever you think of Trump, the idea that the DOJ and the FBI have been weaponized against a candidate who's challenging to win the highest office is a very bad sign. This is what very seriously defunct kind of dysfunctional banana republics do. New pandemic lockdowns, this dopey WHO it wants to somehow take the sovereignty of all nations and tell people what they can and can't do. Possibility of climate change lockdowns, which is the biggest asinine scam ever, quite frankly. But they've sold a lot of, especially the younger population, on the idea that no, you have to stay within a 15-minute city while we fly in private jets, right, to go tell you what bugs you're going to eat for the next few years.
Well, and they've destroyed people's mental health with the climate change fear. Like they
Yeah, yeah.
literally have taught people since they're, just starting like out their lives. These are kids, and you're telling them the world's going to end because of these bad people,
And
and they've
you're
got them
bad.
brain
Yeah, yeah,
right. They've got them
exactly. Yeah,
brainwashed from a young age, so the anxiety levels are through the roof on some of these
yeah,
kids because they literally think the world's ending when
yeah. It's
it's not.
awful.
It's not even close.
No, it's awful. And look, with respect to climate change, I'm not insensitive to the fact that it would be good if we stopped polluting so much. It would be good to stop throwing garbage in the oceans and just indiscriminately sort of, if you'll excuse me, shitting where we eat. This is not a good policy. Like, it is good for us to get but how is that going to happen by locking people in their cities and all the rest? Obviously, it's a recipe for violence, political violence, trade wars, right? You see more and more of that. The old saying, right? And when goods stop crossing borders, soldiers start. The possibility of a cyber attack, energy crisis, terrorist attacks, AI displacing jobs. Like, what if? I know you quoted me this recently. Trucking is the biggest single employment for most people in Middle America. There's over 1 million truckers. Like, what happens if those trucks get automated by AI? Natural disasters, immigration crisis. I was in Mexico recently watching streams of people from all over the world just walk north toward the border. How long is that going to continue?
And that's a super important point that it's not Mexicans. Like Mexicans on
Mm-mm.
net from Mexico to the U.S. and U.S. to Mexico, the immigration is going from U.S.
It's a
to
net
Mexico.
outflow. That's exactly right. Yep.
People are coming through Mexico from Africa, the Middle East, Asia,
Asia.
some like
Yep.
Venezuela. There's Argentina. There's some people coming from like Latin America in general, but the majority of people, or a plurality maybe, are
Yep.
coming from not South America and Latin
Yeah.
America.
Yeah. And listen, I mean, I wrote about this recently. I was in Guatemala at my place in the mountains there last year and a half ago, 2022, something like that. And I took a ride with a taxi driver who talked to me about what was happening in the US with respect to the two very polarized sides, like sort of gunning up and getting ready to go at each other. And I asked him, I said, how is it that you know so much about what's going on in the US? He said, because that's exactly how the Civil War happened in Guatemala. Now, most people don't know this, but from 1960 to 1996, there was massive genocide in Guatemala. This is pre, ubiquitous 24/7 media. So it's not like everybody back then had a direct TV station that was covering all the people that were being slaughtered in Guatemala. This was a big deal, and the peace accords were signed very shortly before I got there in 1999. The accords were signed in '96, and so there was people alive who went through a lot of the Civil War down there. And he's this 70-plus-year-old gentleman driving a taxi is quoting me exactly how a civil war starts. And he said, listen, I'm telling you exactly what's coming in the U.S. We've seen it. We already know where that leads. So, I mean, this is just a partial list. I'm sure you guys could come up with other items that are even more disturbing and more damning. But
Wait, I'm really curious. What else did that Guatemalan guy say? Because like, what were the factors that he saw as the prerequisite to a civil war that parallels today?
constant bickering and agitation of, like, one of the things that you see that's really troubling to me at any rate, and I think to anybody who's traveled and seen enough of the world. People say things publicly, and social media obviously has created a forum where all of this can take place. You see people intentionally saying the most inflammatory, most hurtful, most instigating kind of comments they can possibly come up with toward the other side. And, I'll get a gun and shoot you, and this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, how long before that boils over into, okay, I'm calling you bluff, do it? Or somebody, what typically happens, obviously, is that somebody says, okay, well, the danger of something bad happening to me is so great, I now need to act preemptively. That's when the war begins. We have a justification to go kill them before they kill us, right? And that's typically how these things go. The Guatemalan government extinguished and exterminated entire villages. They're still, in the last 20 years, they've still turned up bodies from places that were just bulldozed over, right? They killed everybody and buried them and tried to, make it all go away. But of course, it never does, right? And the kind of effect that has on a psyche of the people there was really something to behold.
I
So
mean, people gloss over what a war looks like, and it's not pretty. Like, people laugh and joke about, oh, there's a civil war coming in the United States, or we're already in a civil war. And I mean, in some ways, I understand what they're talking about. Things are extremely tense. People are going a little crazy. But at the same time, your everyday life is very normal in the United States right now.
yeah, things are
But
so good, right?
it could tip over. Like, there is no guarantee that this society we've built is going to last. In fact, we know, because we're an empire, it's almost destined to collapse at some point. There, like, I don't know if the US could be the one empire that somehow survived. The odds are not, the historical narrative is not on our side for that to happen. Um, so when that does happen, maybe it's a year from now, maybe it's, 100 years from now. Who knows? Roman Empire lasted forever and they had multiple collapses. But a lot of people are kind of scared to go to Latin America because the ideas of the things you've said, like Guatemala had a civil war, El Salvador a long time ago had a civil, not that long ago, had a civil war. Venezuela, Argentina, all these places have been chaotic on and off. So the idea that most Americans have about Latin America is like, yeah, I can't go there. It's too crazy. It's too violent. It's run by drug cartels. It's not safe like here in the United States. How do you address people when they like say stuff like that to you?
So most of my travel experience is in Latin America. I'm very fond of the region. I'll go into reasons why that's so, and some of the adventures that I've had there in the last 20 plus years. The reality of life in Latin America for somebody like you, like me, like our viewers, right? If you're in North America, you're automatically, most people don't do the math on this, but you're automatically in about the top, I don't know, 10, 15% wealthiest people in the world, just because your culture is so, like, we're so wealthy. If you have a house, or even if you're just living and working in North America, you're making the kind of money that makes you a very, very high income earner compared to the rest of the world. You're somewhere in the top 10 to 1% of wealthy people in the world. So where are you going when you end up in a place like Latin America? Are you going to a neighborhood where gangbangers are shooting each other in Mexico? You couldn't find these places if you tried, and you would certainly know that you were in the wrong part of town long before any trouble came along. So the reality of life in Latin America is, imagine yourself living the way people in, maybe it's not a completely fair parallel, because obviously there is a sort of relative and absolute quality to wealth, but like people in Aspen, Colorado, are not worried that they're going to get carjacked, right? That's not what's going on in Aspen, Colorado. If you're in Cabo, if you're in Recoleta, or various parts of Argentina and Buenos Aires and Bariloche in the mountains, or right, you're not running with the kind of crowd where people are going to actually, where crime is rampant and really bad things are going to happen. No, you're in the part that's the most protected, the most well heeled, right? The wealthiest, the best off, the best schools, the best shopping, right? You're in the highest echelon of these societies pretty much by default. It would be hard for you to find really rundown parts of Guatemala City, or Lima, where I spent some time in Peru. No, you're going to be in the areas where 4 and 5 star resorts are located, and where people come because they have a certain level of wealth, and because those areas then are obviously the most protected. And so the reality of Latin America with respect to safety is very, very different than, and you find me anybody who talks about how dangerous it is. And I'm not saying there's no danger. I'm saying that the danger is, like, if you went to Chicago, there would be parts of Chicago you would probably do well to stay out of. And you would know exactly how to do that. By instinct, you would know how to do that. In Latin America, it's no different. You're not going to find yourself in a crossfire with, rival cartel members, shooting, like, that's all for the movies. It makes for a very good Netflix series, but it's not really how things go. I will tell you a story about bribing cops in Mexico here in a second, because the reality of crime and criminality in places like Latin America is the people you have to fear are the officials, right? Now, in North America, we're starting to get a taste of what it feels like when officialdom actually is the criminal element. I mean, we are crossing a very bad threshold in the United States, in Canada too, for heaven's sake, with the confiscating of banks, where it's the people who are elected or even unelected, but running the institutions who are the criminals. It's these people you have to watch out for. And so you have to make that mental shift. You have to recognize that, yeah, you may, right, you may have to bribe a cop if you're in Mexico. There's a right and a wrong way to do that, by the way. But the reality of safety in Latin America is very different than the myths and the sort of bullshit posts that you get from the U.S. State Department about, don't go to Dominican Republic because somebody's going to, slip a drug into your drink and then, you'll end up dead, right? This kind of thing. It's like, it's not that that stuff never happens, but you got to be pretty damn dumb and you got to be pretty oblivious to put yourself in a situation where things like that can happen. That's the truth.
Yeah, there's a certain rule, and it's coming more to America too. It used to not be true in America, but it's more and more true now. Is just don't display your wealth too arrogantly in Latin America or in the United States anymore. There's rappers that posted their watches on Instagram and got shot for it in public because people know where they are. So it's just a general, security measure now is don't brag about your wealth with what you're wearing. You don't have to wear a $40,000 Rolex and, drive a Bugatti if you're in Mexico. You're asking for trouble no matter where in the world you do that at this point. Uh, just be a little humble, be a normal person.
And it's an interesting point. And I just piggyback on that. My son was born in Mexico in 2021, and we actually stayed in a town. I can tell him where it is, right? In North Yucatan, in Merida, which is a kind of no-go zone, right? All the cartels agreed that there will be no violence, no drug-related, gang-related violence in Merida. So it's very safe. The murder rate in Merida, I think, is about the same as Wisconsin, right, which is not exactly known as the murder capital of the U.S. And in Merida, just to give you an idea, it's not like you have to run around in fear for your life. There was a sushi restaurant below us where we stayed, very near to the hospital, for when a baby came, and a guy pulls up in a McLaren, $200,000 Mercedes. There was all kinds of very, very high-end expensive cars. Like, what's going on here? I mean, this is ostensibly just a medium-sized city in Mexico. The level of wealth and the level of prosperity that is coming to these places, and I'll tell you the reason that this is happening, the level of wealth that's coming to certain parts of Latin America is shocking because, and most people, nobody I know talks about this. One guy that you and I both really admire, Henry, Bill Bonner, has written about this. The Industrial Revolution did not deliver its gifts to the whole planet the way it gave to Europe and the US. A lot of these places are experiencing the one-time boon, the one-time gift, the one-time big boom that happens when machinery and factories and sort of the industrializing of certain parts. You could see this in Panama. God, if I had only bought property in Panama City 2 decades ago, I mean, the place sprouted like a field of mushrooms. I mean, the skyline of Panama City is stunning. And they're still building high rises. They're still growing, right? The growth inside the country, I think the last I read, it's 6.2% GDP year over year growth in GDP. I mean, no developed country has that, right? That's normal for these places now because they're getting all the benefit of machinery and the mechanizing of supply chains and all these different things that we take for granted. It's booming. It's like the 1950s in some of these little towns in Latin America.
Yeah, it's amazing. I tell people don't understand that the United States is, when you're investing inside the United States, you're trying to go from like 95 to 100. But when you're investing in some of these rapidly developing Latin American countries, and I hear there's opportunities like this in Africa and Asia too. I just don't know the regions as well. But it really is like you have the opportunity to go from 10 to 100. Like their growth range is where we were in the 40s, 50s, 60s in America. The opportunities are just so much bigger and faster and more explosive in Latin America than they are in the United States. The only other thing I would say is Bitcoin is the only comparable investment that you could do right now that's going to have that kind of generational return.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I told you about my place. I bought property in Central America, in Highlands in Guatemala, in the year 2000. Basically sat on it, lived there on and off for 20 plus years, and I still go back there. We were back there last year, enjoyed ourselves enormously. And I'm up roughly 80 times my money in 23 years. Now, I challenge you to find any place where you're going to get you can make good money still in real estate in North America or various parts of Europe, I'm sure, but you're not going to make 80 times your money. You're not going to make that kind of gain, right? When these places, you go to a place in Latin America that they had no electricity 2 years before I arrived. Then they get electricity. Suddenly the roads are paved. Suddenly now everybody's got cell phones, and the cell towers jumped right over the creating of landlines, which is a tremendous infrastructure that has to be put in. They skipped it by putting up cell towers, so now everybody's connected. Now people got motorized vehicles, and machinery takes over for doing some of the stuff that the agriculture requires. And so the one-time jump in prosperity that happens, and if you find one of these places, you can end up very wealthy. That's an important message.
I just wrote about this in my weekly white pill that literally people are sleeping on how big of an impact Starlink will have, delivering high-speed internet instantly to every single underdeveloped part of the world. You're unlocking trillions and trillions of dollars in human potential that can get right online and start doing business with the rest of the world in American dollar terms or some others national currency terms. Like, you're not in some remote region in Africa dealing in, sticks and stones. All of a sudden that person who happens to be talented but never had access to the world has access to the entire knowledge of the internet and all the commerce there. People
That's
don't understand how fast that skipping of having to hardwire the country is going to accelerate some of the profits in these places
That's
as well.
exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I look for these places when I travel. It's like, what if this infrastructure project gets done here? I was just in Mexico checking out a place on the coast, big infrastructure project coming there. I imagine fabulous fortunes are about to be made. They're actually trying to take a piece of the commerce from the Panama Canal, which is going because Panama is going through a drought. Right? There's real problems. There's real bottlenecks at the canal. So here's a ready-made solution. These kinds of things where huge prosperity. You and I talked about the big project that's going on in the Yucatan on that side of Mexico as well. They put a train in. There's a new international airport coming that takes a big burden off of Cancun, which is really, quite frankly, it's not overcrowded yet the way we think of overcrowding at a place like, LaGuardia or, some really major airport in the US, but it's crowded and it's annoyingly crowded. And all of that is going to change. So more and more wealth is going to be flowing in further south in Tulum, right? Like identifying these areas right as they hit the knee of the curve, and then right where you see this really tremendous, almost vertical kind of development happens. That's where you want to be. That's where you want to be if you can. That's where you want to be invested. You spend some time there. You figure out exactly how you put your life together so that you can really benefit from that. And there is no investment comparable to that in North America that I'm aware of. Certainly not in real estate and the kinds of things. And on top of it, you get a fabulous lifestyle and a whole lot of extra freedom by being an expat in one of these places as it starts to trend upward.
There's a place in Mexico that we've also talked about in the Yucatan called Izamal, and it's the Yellow City. It's an 18th century Catholic chapel slash church, I don't know, cathedral almost, built on top of a Mayan ruin. The entire city was painted yellow for the arrival of the Pope some like century and a half ago. There's still a pyramid in the middle of town. Now, it's designated one of Mexico's magical cities, and it's gorgeous, but it's kind of hard to get there for tourists. It's like an hour and a half drive from Merida, Merida's not the most convenient. There's an airport there, but it's not the most convenient place to get into. But the Tren Maya, the high-speed electric train, is having a stop now at Izamal, which makes it a 20-minute train ride from like Cancun, 10 minutes from Merida. It's going to have this influx. And right now you can buy property there. Very nice, like acre lots for like $10,000, $7,000. There's houses for $20,000.
Mexico is a bargain. Yeah, the Yucatan is a bargain, right? Anywhere you look, you can't believe actually how cheap it is. Yeah, that whole area.
And it's going to explode. Like, that train is going to bring in so much money that town. I would really like. It seems natural to make that a Bitcoin economy because it's already everything's
It's
painted gold. It
it's
looks like
happening.
a Bitcoin city. So I'd like anybody who wants a Bitcoin project.
Get on that.
Start a circular economy in Izamal. I want to talk about some of your adventures that you've had. You referenced bribing the police in Mexico. So,
Yes.
what is the right and wrong way to bribe the police in Mexico?
First of all, first of all, this is for educational purposes only. Okay. I had to transit Mexico multiple times in various guises. I actually had to drive through there on one occasion to get things to my property in Guatemala. I'm trying to think of all the times I've had to bribe officials there. These people work for very little pay. Okay, they are not interested in. Um, Obviously, when I say there's a right and a wrong way to do it, obviously, if you're offensive about it, it helps to speak the language. But you could do it, right? Even if you don't speak good Spanish, there's kind of universal understanding. If somebody's working for, I don't know, $5 a day. I mean, I don't know what a cop in Mexico, a state police in Mexico. They're very intimidating. They run around in great big brand new like Chevy trucks, painted black usually, right? They're very heavily armed, right? They got the whole intimidation factor on their side, and there's soldiers that traverse the highways. They keep a very obvious the national police is the army, right? They keep a very high profile, especially in tourist areas. I suppose that's supposed to make everyone feel at ease. But we were driving down the coast near Tampico. But as we passed down the highway there, I remember, I don't know exactly what part we were in. I had to relieve myself on the side of the road. Just so happens a cop drove by and he stops. He said, "How dare you? I can't believe you would do that." It's very like there's garbage absolutely everywhere. There's like a dead buzzard over here, right? And plastic trash. Like the way some parts of Mexico are very trashy. Not all, but some. And this was goodness. This was 20 plus years ago, and I spoke good Spanish at the time. And the way you don't bribe somebody is to offer outright to pay them to make it go away, right? But I stood there and I listened to him, and you be very polite and you sort of yes sir them as best you can, right, while he's talking, and then right, without moving, without doing anything else, you suggest that there must be some way to take care of this problem without having to go down to the station. Gee, what could that be? You don't reach for money. You don't take out a wad of 20s and start, right? That's a good way to truly get robbed. But you suggest that there must be a way to fix this. If you speak Spanish, you would say something like, well, I imagine there must be a fine associated with this. How much is that fine? And how do I take care of that now? Right? Things like this will at least, I doubt that every cop is open to being bribed, although most of them are. But if you come about it the right way, they appreciate that kind of commerce. They really do. They really do appreciate it. I had to drive my car back through Mexico, same trip. And my pocket got picked about 2 days before I was set to leave. I got my pocket picked riding a bus in Guatemala. Lost my license. Got to the border with Mexico. Now, most people don't know this, but Mexico uses what's called the Napoleonic Code or Napoleonic Law. Napoleonic Law is the opposite of English common law that we're all used to when we think of legal system here in North America. You are not innocent until proven guilty. You are guilty until we sort it out. And so the way they control you transiting through their country with a vehicle is that you have to pay a certain insurance license permit in case you kill somebody or crash it and wreck somebody else's property. They know that they have you, and it's a bond essentially, right? You're putting money into a bond that is then it's like an insurance premium, okay? But I couldn't get one because I didn't have a driver's license, and so same routine. I said, "Wow, when I came south, I said it's not my fault. Obviously, I got my pocket picked. There's nothing I can do." He knew that I had transited south because I had my papers. They only give you 90 days with a vehicle in Guatemala. And so I knew I had to get out. They knew because they had a record that I had transited before. They had a reasonable assumption that I would make it to the other side. And I said, there must be a way to cover the cost of the insurance that I need in order to transit north. I wonder how much that would cost me, right? And these kind of suggestive questions where you're not being too obtuse. You're certainly not openly trying to bribe people. Like, don't think that you're in a Hollywood film and that you're gonna sort of John Wayne your way out of stuff. That's very, very offensive to most working people. Could you do it today? I don't know. In some places you can. There's no question. An attorney that I work with actually got jacked hard coming from Belize to Texas. He got hassled by the cops multiple times. I said, but my friend, why didn't you have some throwdown money? Why didn't you have some way to actually just placate these people so that they would leave you alone? And I wasn't there, so I didn't really see how the whole thing went down. But he's an old guy. He's a very wealthy attorney. He wasn't in the right mind frame and he's not the kind of character who's going to take care of those kinds of problems. But my point is, There's a way that life operates. There's a way that people operate and the way they think in these countries. And you have to know that. You have to understand that ahead of time. Very often, your biggest enemy is the cops. If you get your passport stolen in a place like Guatemala, the last place you're going to go is to the police. You can't go to that, especially if you're I remember a woman and her daughter went up to the police and ended up getting hassled even worse. They're lucky they got out of there with nothing bad happening to them. You have to understand that in some cases, it's the officialdom that is the enemy, and there's a way around that. You have to, you have to know enough about local custom to make sure you're not a victim of that kind of thing.
Well, how do you get to know that local custom? Because I think what you just said is going to scare a lot of people out of wanting to kind of take that step and travel abroad. But
Understood. Yeah, understood. It shouldn't, though. And the reason that it shouldn't is because, first of all, things like this are very, very rare. Second of all, understanding that you're not in a place where people are held to the same kind of standards and ethics and all the rest, but that life does go on just fine. Knowing, being in with the people in the community generally means actually taking part in their lives. Every place I've gone, obviously after I learned good Spanish, it's much, much easier to find yourself welcome in any given context or any given location. But just knowing people in the area, I mean, if you're friends with a mayor in a tiny town, you're not going to get hassled. It's that simple. And inviting the mayor to your house for dinner is nothing in most of these places. And so it's true that there is a level of risk, right, that exists that we don't think of. I mean, I've been hassled by police in the United States for various silly things like traffic offenses by somebody who wanted to be a tough guy, but you're not bribing your way out of that. No one would even think to do such a thing. I'm not saying that it hasn't happened. I'm saying that it's not your first instinct to do that. My point is that you can navigate officialdom with a lot. It is quite frankly a kind of corruption that works rather than, right, a kind of corruption where you have no access to it, which is what we really have in North America, where it's like, these people get to make decisions and like you can take it or leave it, right? You can, like, you're going to take it and like it, basically. And that's sort of what we have in North America. It's a much more granular, sort of down an earthy kind of corruption that exists throughout Latin America, and it works. If you need to get your way out of stuff, you can do it. That's my point. It's actually a good thing.
yeah, the problem with corrupt cops in America is when you run into one, there is no way to bribe them.
No,
Like, you're actually just at their whim. You're going to jail. Uh, they're gonna they hold everything over you. There is no outlets for it. So I'd rather deal with a corrupt cop that can be bought off than a corrupt cop that can't. Quite frankly.
exactly. And my point in telling you these stories is not to frighten you. My point is there's a way around it. There's a way to deal with it. There's a way to navigate it. But it doesn't help to be naive. And while maybe you're not going to learn, fluent Spanish, in the 2 weeks before you head off to your vacation in Mexico or whatever, just be aware that you're in an environment where there are solutions to problems. Those solutions are okay, right? Those solutions exist, and you're perfectly okay to try to explore them as long as you're not being super obtuse about it, and in a way that might also make them nervous. Like, yeah, but I don't want to get caught taking this, right? You can't be that obvious about it, right? I think it's a good rule of thumb.
So just out of curiosity, let's say I'm in Guatemala and I lose my passport. What do I do besides going to the cops?
No, you would go to the American embassy. And obviously when you travel, right, very simple checklist, have a photocopy of your passport. Put it in three different, put it in this bag, put it in this bag, put it in another bag. Just a photocopy is enough, because at least it proves that, right, it's very, nobody is going to take on face value that you faked that, right? If you got to get to a place like, no, my passport really was lifted, I am who I say I am, and keep a separate, right? I always keep separate identities.
They can look up your passport number. It'll have your picture
They
right
can
there.
look
They
it
can
up
prove
immediately.
very easily prove that that
Very
picture
quickly
is legit.
confirm it. Exactly. That's a simple hack for travelers. Yep.
So I want to talk about some of your other adventures, because you have just based on the fact that you practiced medicine in some of these countries in Latin America, you have very different experiences, and you've kind of put yourself in the line of fire more than most people would have. Can you talk about your you went down to Panama at one point on some medical excursions? Can you talk about that?
I did. Actually, most of the medical missions that I ran. So, if we rewind for about 30 seconds here, I met a medicine man in the year 2000 in the highlands in Guatemala, in this little pueblo where I sort of washed ashore after 6 months at sea. And I felt like I had something really valuable to learn there, and ended up putting down roots, and I still own property there. He was my mentor for, I sort of budgeted for, obviously I offered to pay him for his expertise. And it was an official kind of like, this was a formal training as far as between him and me. It was something that we planned out and sort of, this is what I want to cover. And I was able to design my own curriculum with his guidance about what he thought was most important for me. He was just an excellent, excellent, like superb natural healer. He's about 30 years older than me. I believe he's still alive, in reasonable health. I saw him a few years back when I was down there. Superb, like really skilled, very professional. He was the kind of guy that other people just wanted to be around. He had that whole healing vibe, but he was he was no nonsense. He was a really jovial, kind of very colorful character, but he was also had no nonsense side to him when it came to healing. And he helped, people who had been to the hospital and like the doctors couldn't do anything, they came to Jaime. They came to my mentor. And I watched how he operated. I learned not just medicine from a technical, clinical standpoint, ways that you could help, migraines and knee pain and actual protocols, but also how he managed himself as a healer. And that this was a very, very key part of my career as well. I ended up getting a license to practice in the United States. I still keep it active. In 2005. And so I took my education and really ran with it. This was something that was very important. This was not like a hobby I did on the side. I had a 9-year apprenticeship with him and ended up teaching and practicing in a hospital on the lake in Guatemala, in Santiago de Atitlan. If you care to look it up, it's quite a story behind this hospital. There was a real tragedy there with a big mudslide. A bunch of people were buried, and the hospital was buried right after they opened it. And so we opened and kept working, and like the hospital sort of rose from the ashes. It's a tremendous, tremendous success and feel good story. And now, I mean, it's a tremendous outpost of conventional medicine. But I would have doctors come down and teach people, and they would come in and learn some of the natural healing techniques that I had learned. And we would run medical missions deep, deep into the bush in mostly Guatemala. I remember one time I was with a UN doctor from Nigeria who had also made his home in Antigua, the old capital of Guatemala. And we ran insulin to a type 1 diabetic. Now, we had to drive 2 days. Guatemala is not a big place. It's about as big as West Virginia, right? But obviously, if the roads are bad enough and right, it takes long enough to go anyplace, we took a 4x4 way into the interior of Guatemala. God knows, I couldn't find it again if I tried. And really harrowing stuff, Henry. I mean, if people saw this was like, I remember we actually, at one point we had to park because the bridge was washed out, or the vehicle bridge was washed out from a very, very bad storm that came through, Hurricane Mitch, I think in 1998. And it hadn't been rebuilt in all those years. And then we took a swinging bridge like Indiana Jones across this river, this raging river, where you're looking down thinking, boy, oh boy, I sure hope the wood doesn't give way. And then up along a cliff, and we're hanging, looking over the side, and right into this pueblo where the people didn't even speak Spanish. So it was very odd. It was very awkward. We had some students and observers with us, and we brought the insulin to Rosa, and everybody stood around. Nobody could converse. Everybody just smiled and gestured and nodded and ummed and odd and right, and eventually shook hands. And we had a cup of Rosa Jamaica tea, I'm sure. And then on our way we went, 2 days back out, all the way back to the capital. And so it was an outrageous experience to be having, especially for a guy who I had an interest in medicine. I had no business traveling with UN doctors, that's for sure. And yet I was able to somehow glom onto this and have these experiences in a way that, I don't know a doctor in 1,000 who's had the kind of medical experiences that I've had. Even people who try to do such things, and Doctors Without Borders and this kind of stuff. It's very hard to reproduce the kind of sort of adventure that I had in medicine, all because I set myself out to have that kind of life.
I mean, yeah, that's crazy. The washed out roads. What language in Guatemala is it? Like a native?
In my little pueblo, they speak Quechiquel. And then across the lake on a different side, they speak Tzutuil, and then Quiche, Quechua. I think the family of languages, I may be wrong about this. There's actually a program in Kansas State or Kansas University, either one, that teaches a program in Quechiquel, if you can believe that. But I think the family of languages is called the Quechua language or possibly Quiche language, but I don't remember which. But it hardly matters. There's probably not 100,000 people in the world that speak Quechiquel. But it is fascinating. It's like you hear these people as a very ancient indigenous tongue, dialect. It's nothing like anything that you would hear. It has nothing to do with Spanish. It sounds like there's clicking sounds and like clacking in the back of the throat, almost like bird noises, right? It's very odd. You imagine for hundreds and even thousands of years, the Maya people living in that part of the world must have listened to animals and listened to the sounds of the forest and then made noises, right, that came up with their language like that. So it's a very, very authentic experience living that far in indigenous culture.
It's one of the things people forget about Central America is how deep the history goes. Like way, way before the Spanish came, the Aztecs and the Mayans. It was, I mean, the culture goes back so far. Like Izamal, which I brought up earlier, has 3 official languages. Spanish is only one of them because
That's right.
the original indigenous dialects are still spoken there
That's right.
thousands of years after they were conquered by Montezuma and all the Spanish.
Yeah, the conquistadors. Yeah, the conquistadors came in and changed everything. And yeah, that's exactly right. Like, remember that there's whole civilizations that were down there that basically rose, fell, disappeared into the jungle. They uncovered stuff in the last 20 odd years. They've uncovered ruins near Palenque, which is in that part of the Yucatan Peninsula south of Yucatan, but like where Guatemala and Belize kind of meet. Like, that's deep, deep, deep jungle where the jungle is so voracious, and if you leave it alone for 100 years, you can't find anything there. But they uncover pyramids, piles, as my teacher used to say jokingly, piles of rocks from a defeated culture. But when you think about the rise and fall of an entire civilization across thousands of years, I mean, all of that was going on down there. So I mean, it's if you're into that kind of thing, it was very, very rich. It was a very, very rich experience, a very authentic experience. It's now a little bit adulterated because, like everywhere, everybody's staring at cell phones and doing what modern people do. And obviously, there's nothing romantic about the poverty, right, that these people are mired in. But the explosion of growth in the last 23, 24 years, just since I've known it and been there, is reason enough, I think, for viewers and for people who care about freedom. Most of the people that we know from the club where we met and played that poker game have done some version of taking a portion of their wealth, putting it aside in a fast developing part of the world, and then watching it just go up exponentially. Because once you identify one of these, and there's a lot of them. My little town is about 2,500 people. I mean, it's not a place you would think, hey, I'll go there and make a bundle of money on real estate. But it happened. And it happened because you can identify some of the very obvious markers that indicate that a place is on the way up. And so it's all over Latin America that's happening right now.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. You've had some other adventures throughout Latin America. Do you want to talk about?
Yes, I
I mean,
have.
you've been to Peru, Colombia, Panama,
Yep.
Argentina. We started talking about Panama, I believe. You want to talk about your experience in Panama?
Yes. Yes. I mean, the most outrageous thing, Panama's interesting. I've been north of the city and I've been south of the city. I mean, it's actually east and west. I mean, it's kind of like an S, the way it bends around. But Panama City's fascinating to me. It feels like a place where there's all kinds of shady, seedy, underworld kind of doings. And I guarantee that that's there. And the reason I know this, even though I'm not really looking for that when I'm down there these days, is because the canal is like a golden goose. It really is. I mean, they make so much money transiting the world's commerce through this. Most of the country is tied to the canal in one form or another. And it's a money printer, plain and simple, right? And they can raise the taxes and the tariffs on ships coming through the canal anytime they want, anytime they need to. And so, the fact that they're growing at 6% annualized GDP or whatever it is, whatever the exact number is, that's not stopping, right? The prosperity that you see in Panama is tremendous. I remember getting pulled over in Panama City. I can't remember what year this was, and the guy's asking me, "Are you FABE or CIA?" And I said, "What's he talking about? What's this guy asking me over and over again?" He kept asking me and harassing me. Now, there's no FABE is of course FBI. There's no reason the FBI would be doing anything in Panama, but he had a reason to ask me, I'm sure. And maybe it's my haircut, maybe it's my general demeanor, but he was convinced I was CIA, and I had to talk my way out of this very overzealous Panamanian. He was a cop, but I don't really know what his angle was. I didn't get down to the bottom of that. I did manage to convince him that I was nothing but an ordinary businessman trying to essentially get home to my family for dinner, and that I had business down here, and that I was looking at investments, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually he relented. But such run-ins make you really aware that there's a whole lot going on in Panama that that is more than meets the eye. And so it's an exciting place. It's an intriguing place. You can imagine all kinds of things going on there because of the wealth that's being generated.
Another place where it's coming into wealth right now that you wouldn't have thought is Colombia. Like Colombia used to just mean drug land to me. Like that's and that's American movies as much as anything else. That all the cocaine comes from Colombia, right? But you spent some time in Colombia. Can you talk about some of the experiences you had there?
Yes, not much time, but I did actually do a medical mission and a conference that I attended there. But this was and Colombia earned that reputation, by the way. Obviously, they had they call them rebels, but of course, these are also people that, like you and me, want to be left alone by the government. Of course, the growing season in Colombia is so tremendous. You can grow all kinds of great crops there, including very profitable drug crops like the cocoa plant, like marijuana. Obviously, for legalized marijuana, it might have the best growing season anywhere. Almost exactly like perfect amount of sunlight and all the rest. The country is beautiful. Like anywhere you go, it's just a stunning natural wonders everywhere you look. And we were in Guadalajara de Buga, which is way up in the mountains, but it wasn't far from the FARC territory or the FARC held territory. These people have now obviously they've sort of made peace, but I think like a lot of I think that peace is as tenuous as the country is stable. And so we had soldiers secure a perimeter around us for the time that we were there. It didn't feel very tense to me, quite honestly. But the very fact that they weren't too many years out of this was the early 2000s, if I recall, and they weren't too many years out of the 1990s, which was the bloody Wild West. I mean, it was gunfights in the streets. I mean, it was and obviously the drug cartels fought tooth and claw for all the territory they could get. But all of that is really in Colombia's past. And to anybody who's looking at any kind of sort of, hey, what if I had a base outside North America? I don't think you can do better than Colombia right now. Here's a piece of trivia. I learned this from our mutual colleague, Porter Stansberry. The one country that has never defaulted is Colombia. It doesn't mean that they necessarily have like a great financial situation, but the country is so wealthy. And one of the things I want to bring up, because I'm not telling stories to frighten people about what's out there. Part of the reason that I really enjoy Latin America, and part of the reason that I want your listeners and your viewers to understand just how free you can be in these places is, yeah, for all their problems, for anything that you could say that's might go in the negative column about them. Most of these countries have been through really, really shitty times in the last century. At some point, like Colombia, for example, what happens at the end of a bunch of drug violence when people are blowing each other up and trying to fight over drug is that people get really sick of that kind of behavior. And so you have this ebb and flow of bad times turning into prosperity. Most of the world outside North America has already been through some pretty rough seas and rough sailing, and they're very much convinced that prosperity is a good thing and that we want to keep peace and we want things to work the way that people benefit from commerce, right? And that everybody's sort of pulling together. If you find places like this that are on the way up, Venezuela is an interesting one to watch right now because obviously they're coming out of a really tough time. To go from 0 to 1 or 0 to 10, right? As prosperity returns after hard times, this kind of crisis investing, we know, obviously, right? Our other colleague, Doug Casey, wrote the book on this. And so understanding how you can position yourself in a place that's on the way up, it's really true. You don't really need to know that much. You just get 1 or 2 places right on the way up with a minor investment that, quite frankly, could go either way. And suddenly you find yourself having just a tremendous upsurge in your own prosperity. It's a life affirming kind of thing because it gives you this tremendous ability to go live in another part of the world, like, quite frankly, in a style that you may not be able to afford in North America. And for all of that to happen very quickly, that's what happened to me.
I think one of the things people have to do is break their kind of American only mindset, because things in the rest of the world don't operate the same way they do in America. It's actually literally based on, like you mentioned earlier, different law traditions. So you have to understand that things are not going to operate necessarily like they do in the United States, but that doesn't mean there's not opportunities. One of the things I keep going, like I am kind of obsessed with El Salvador right now, just because
Sure.
I find the country fascinating for their Bitcoin adoption. Bukele is just, I can't, he's fascinating to me. because I don't know exactly how I feel about him. He's literally turned the country around from the murder capital of the world to one of the safest countries in Central America,
In
in
the
the world
world.
right now.
Yeah, right.
Um, their murder rate went from the highest in the world to literally one of like lower than most states in the United States. It's nuts. But he also threw 2% of the population in jail. Now, some of those people have to be innocent. But given everything that's happening there, their economy is exploding. They're coming up on an election right now where he has a 90% approval rating. You only see 90% in like fake dictator elections, right? Except this time in El Salvador, because of the dramatic transformation, you'd be crazy not to support this guy if you're Salvadorian, because they do love the prosperity. And even though they know that not everything done was perfect, it's way better than what they had. It's like all these people were dying. Is it better that everybody dies or a few people get thrown in jail that are innocent? As an American, that's a hard calculation to make. As a Salvadorian that's lived through a civil war and then years of cartel and drug gang control, it's such an easy decision to make. It's stability is revolutionary in some of these countries. So
That's exactly what I'm talking about. You know, you find somebody like, obviously Bukele is, he's a man's man. He's the kind of character and has the kind of character that you see appear in times of real chaos. You know, I look at the so-called leadership of the United States right now, and it's unhinged. There's no, you don't feel that there's any bedrock. You don't feel like anybody has any guts or backbone to stand up for what's right, or very seldom do you even come across somebody who might, you know, be capable of that. And you look at Bukele, you look at Millet, who gave that fire-breathing speech to the WEF last week as we're recording this. These guys are, and there's a concept in Asian culture that in times like this, you will see people emerge, right, who take this kind of stand, this principled stand. And so it's very encouraging, the fact that, because again, what does it mean? What does it mean that a place like El Salvador can turn itself around? If you placed that bet 10 years ago, the odds were so long, right, that anything good could possibly happen in Salvador. And it's true. You know, he put a lot of people with tattoos on their faces in jail. I don't think it's that hard to understand. But the delinquency rate will continue to drop because, and this obviously he understands this perfectly well, because people like prosperity, right? And it's not like if you're a gangbanger and you put MS-13 on your forehead and you're running around killing old ladies, right, to steal their purse and whatever these people are up to. There is no question about the fact that's not a great life for you, right? You may think you're hard as nails and all the rest, but you're watching your friends die. You know how tough it is. And so when people get a taste of prosperity, they tend to like the way that tastes, and it tends to bring everybody else along. So he only has to hold on. And I know I heard and read from several people in my network how he has set up his administration to continue regardless of what happens to him, right? That they've set up a kind of decentralized kind of thing that allows his plan and sort of their trajectory to continue. So it's tremendously encouraging, but it's a great example of exactly what I'm talking about what can happen in Latin America.
Melee is another example you brought up in Argentina. Am I right in saying you were married in Argentina?
I was, yeah. My wife and I got married in a famous tango salon, and obviously it was a celebratory kind of ceremony. I mean, they stopped the classes and like we had a dance with everybody. It was absolutely fantastic. The Argentine people are the longest suffering, most beautiful, most polite, most lovely group of people you could possibly come across. I loved Argentina. The time that I spent there it's among the greatest of all my travels. I really enjoy every time I get down there. And yeah, we were married there, and then we obviously did an official ceremony in the U.S. as well. So yeah, I have some familiarity with Argentina. I mean, what's happening down there too? We got guys in our network on the ground describing the unbelievable pandemonium of prosperity that's at least coming. Obviously, he's got a lot of work to do. It's a very he's got a tough road to hoe, right, to turn that place around. But the fact that people are on board with it, you know, the thing that also distinguishes somebody like Millet and the talk, and anybody watching this, go watch his talk, right? Pull up the talk that he just did at the WEF at their dopey, loathsome conference in Davos. Because what is the power of truth? It's right there. Here's a guy who's educated enough about Austrian economics, about the real way that, right, value creates prosperity, not the phony government thing about fudging the figures and trying to convince you that inflation is less than it is, but the real principles and philosophy of how prosperity is created. And he's plain spoken. And if you got like a sixth grade education, you can basically glom on to what he's saying. And because this guy is such a good teacher and he stands for the right things, here's one guy who's completely turning the tide. Right now, will he make it? We don't know, but right, we're watching it play out.
From a marketing perspective, you can't underestimate the showmanship that comes along with it. He would not be president of Argentina if he didn't have the chainsaw and the over-the-top screaming and the big demonstrations. That stuff gets attention. And
He's
on top of
tremendous.
that, like you said, he actually is a trained Austrian economist. Like, he has degrees. He understands the true nature of the economy, which no socialist does. Like, this is the thing. Everybody's predicting on the left that Argentinians are going to rebel once they realize what social programs he's taking away. Except the social programs don't work because the money's worthless. You can't give people money. Like, there's not enough worthless money to give people to make them happy. And
That's
that's the
exactly
same
right.
thing that's happening to the dollar. It's
Yep.
going to be worthless before long if they keep going down this path. And you can't placate people with fake worthless money. So eventually the rebellion comes, the collapse comes, or you get to a point where you have 120% inflation and you elect a Melee, who I don't even know who it would be in America, but I'm looking forward to finding out because
Yeah,
it's going to be
right.
something before
Well,
long.
it's gonna be a close one, because I don't see a way out of this. Dalio was just talking about what a debt spiral is, where you're printing money to pay for the interest on the debt that you're printing money to increase. Right? It's like you can't get out. Like once that happens, and so yeah, I mean, Argentina is a fascinating place for a lot of reasons. Bill Bonner loves to say we're all headed to Argentina, right? If they don't get their act together, does the U.S. have a window to turn things around? Probably. Probably we do. The question is anybody paying attention, right? Is anybody paying attention? And the thing that you and I talk about, Henry, and that I want to just bring home to your viewers is the good news is you don't have to wait for these clowns to figure out how to make things better, right? There's a lot of things you can do in your life today. You have more opportunities to do more things to protect yourself from really stupid, out of control government than you've ever had before. Now, will that window stay open? Will you still have the opportunity to do these things as the situation unfolds and probably gets a lot worse before it gets better? Nobody knows the answer to that. Nobody knows the answer to how much longer do we have before things really go off a cliff. There's a reckoning coming. There's a reckoning coming, and we started this podcast where the question is why did I feel this way? Sort of why did I set out to live my life the way I live it? I'm now in the Caribbean. I pay no tax to the IRS, and I'm very proud of that fact, since I don't really approve of what they would be doing with that tax money anyway. And basically enjoy my life minding my own business, trying to stay out of the way of some of the really stupid things that I see going on, and helping other people to do the same. If you care about your freedom and your family and your legacy and what's coming after for your children and all the rest, now is the time, right, to be planting your flag and sort of taking steps, right, that are going to protect you from whatever's coming. We have not lived through hard times in North America pretty much ever, right? Maybe if you want to say the unpleasantness of the 1860s, but that didn't affect anybody today, number one. And number
Got
two,
1930s.
yeah, fair enough, right? But even that, the U.S. was on the way up, right? We weren't an empire in decline. We weren't. The currency was still sound, right? There were still reasons to believe that things would and could get better. Is that the case still? I don't know. Like we don't know. We don't know if we're going to be able to pull together, or if everybody's going to go at each other's throats. And like my Guatemalan taxi driver was saying, right, that we're really headed toward a real conflagration and real bloodbath. So it's a very, very interesting, right? The old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Well, here we are. And the question is, how are we going to get out of it? My message to all of you and to all your viewers is take steps. You don't have to watch this thing passively and sort of let it wash over you, right? Like my drowning victim yesterday, good heavens. You don't have to be a victim while this thing comes and knocks you over. There's all kinds of things you can do to protect yourself and to protect your family and to defend what it is that you hold dear. And that's my message to everybody.
Well, that brings up an excellent point because on Wednesday next week, the 31st of January, we're going to be hosting a free webinar that walks people through your wealth framework. Now, this is kind of the framework you use. It's the exact framework you use with your like $25,000 consulting clients when somebody comes to you with a high net worth. This is what you walk them through to get them set up, get some of their money offshore, so just get started to get that process of residency and protecting yourself going. Now, obviously, you don't have to leave the U.S. to start this. So it's literally just a formula for securing your freedom. So we're going to be going through this entire wealth framework very quickly in a free live webinar. You can go to goxplan.com/Tain. That'll redirect you to a sign up link for the webinar. Totally free. There'll be a recording posted for a couple days probably afterwards. So if you don't make it exactly on time, you should still sign up. But yeah, I'm looking forward to doing this webinar with you because there's a lot of stuff I think we can get into that folks will find really valuable in that wealth framework that will help them understand the world and why it's so important, and exactly a couple like real practical steps for securing your future, even if things like pop off in the next 30 days here.
That's right. That's right. Just to be clear and to reinforce what Henry's saying, this is a completely free presentation. There will be actual teaching. I'm going to give you some actionable steps. How do you really tap in? Like, if you wanted to go explore some part of the world, like, hey, I've always wanted to go here, and like, how would I be an insider? Very quickly there. Here's how I did it. Like, here's how I do this when I go find places. The people you should talk to, the ways that you can set yourself up, how to recognize, like how do you identify a place that's really on the way up. You're going to learn that and a bunch of other stuff on the webinar in a way that could really set you free. I mean, my goal and Henry's, our goal here is to really be able to generate in a very short amount of time. You do not need to go travel anywhere to make this happen. Most of the steps you need to really protect yourself can be done right from the comfort of your own living room. But you need to take steps, right? Some amount of action will certainly supersede and really will obviously trump just information. My goal is not to give you a bunch of information. My goal is to actually help you do this. So please check it out.
Yeah, that's goxplan.com/Tain. And we will stay on as long as you guys have questions after that webinar. We're starting at 7. Presentation will probably go 45 minutes, an hour, or something like that. It depends how detailed we get. And then it's just Q&A. Whatever you want to ask about it, stick around. We're happy to do this. I think it's really important for the moment we're living in to not be held slave to like the sovereign risk of just being under the United States jurisdiction. It can turn on you pretty quickly, as we've seen. Look at the January 6th people. They're confiscating people's bank accounts even in America. Look at Mercola. They didn't like what he said about the jabs, and all of a sudden he doesn't have a business anymore. So it's not something to dawdle on. If you're at all concerned about this type of stuff, it's a free webinar. goxplan.com/Tain. So hope
Yep.
to see you there.
Beautiful, beautiful. And yeah, thank you, Henry. Thank you for putting this together. I'm tempted to just address, I know a lot of people think that, making plans to set your life up outside your country of birth, isn't that sort of like cowardly, running, betraying your nation, et cetera, et cetera. These kinds of like anti-patriotic kinds of comments and sentiment that especially people will hurl at you if you figure out that might be a smart thing to do. And the way I'm describing it, my thing is that it's actually the most American of all ideals is to stand up for individual liberty. The idea of America is not about an elite group of politicians telling everybody what to do. It's the exact opposite of that. The government is supposed to work for us. The government is supposed to be restrained by our founding documents. What they're allowed to do to us is limited. Now, obviously, a lot of these ideas have been lost. My thinking is the best thing you can do to bring about a peaceful end to all the madness that's going on inside our institution, maybe not all of it, but a big portion of it, that it will come to an end when the best, brightest, most productive, and also let's be honest, like people who are productive and have wealth and can generate wealth, if you take a portion of that and you set yourself apart so that you're not going to be damaged by whatever's coming in the U.S. and Canada, you've struck a big blow for freedom and for liberty. My fear for a lot of people is that what's coming is going to be the worst events that they've ever dealt with, because the likelihood of confiscations and capital controls and people controls. We've already talked about this during the lockdowns, where it wasn't clear, exactly how we were going to get our liberty back. That's a very, very dangerous precedent. So, we think it's time for people who really noticed and sat up and took notice. This is your chance to really learn some of the very, very best tactics and strategies. I went out and learned this stuff so that you don't have to spend 25 years figuring it out for yourself. It's going to be a super jam-packed webinar with a lot of valuable tips. So please be there.
Absolutely. So a very simple choice between freedom and wealth or poverty and enslavement. So, all right. I hope to see you guys there. Again, that's goxplan.com/Tain. And until then, everybody, stay free.